dig a little bit deeper and see if, in fact, maybe there is dyslexia or ADHD or a learning disability or whatever it may be. And if so, there's so many services and resources that are available now to help students and to help them build these skills that are so critical for success in school and really success in life.
Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Dr. Shafer of Talks with Dr. Shafer. I'm so glad you're here. I'm a physician, mom, life coach, musician, author, publisher, and I'm passionate about helping others reclaim their stories so that they can build their most beautiful future. Today, on another guest episode of Talks with Dr. Shafer, I am so excited to share the story of someone who not only has reclaimed their story several times in their career, pivoting into the role that really matched with their goals for their life as they were finding out who they were. They also are helping children and families on their educational journey come along with them and reclaim their stories and live their best lives. Today, we have Dr. Emily Levy, who is the founder and director of EBL Coaching in the New York City, New Jersey area, serving students and families in person and remotely, who uses evidence-based, individualized, multisensory techniques to help kids who have a variety of learning difficulties learn new tools and succeed on their education journey. We know that early interventions and providing support in the classroom and beyond is critical for future success for our children. And I'm so grateful to have Dr. Levy on the show today to share her story and some tools that we can use to help our children thrive. Dr. Levy, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I'm really excited to be here, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
I have been really looking forward to this conversation because as someone who has a lot of experience having these conversations with patients, with people who maybe already have a diagnosis or maybe have neurodivergence running through their family, I have seen how this has played out in many ways. And we were talking off camera about how I would love to start off our conversation, one, with sharing your story about why you're so passionate about this, and two, trying to break the ice on having these conversations of if you are feeling like your student, your child is having issues in the classroom, facing challenges and may need support, how do we go about doing that? So we've got a lot to cover today. Dr. Levy, how did you get to the point in your career where you really wanted to focus not only on education, which has been a big part of your life, and I know was something that your mother modeled for you with her work as well, but also to really lean into a very scientific-based, individualized EBL, evidence-based learning technique of that one-on-one connection with students to help them thrive?
Sure. Well, I'd be happy to tell you my story. And my journey actually started when I was very young. My mother, who you alluded to, started and ran a school for kids with learning disabilities down in South Florida, which is where I grew up. So I spent so much of my childhood working at her school, working with kids, observing teachers, and really seeing these kids go from struggling learners with poor self-esteem to thriving and doing really well in school and feeling good about themselves. So that was really such a positive experience for me. With all of that said, I felt in my young mind that I wanted to carve my own path and do something totally different than my mom originally. So I went to Brown for my undergraduate degree. And then after college, I actually ended up doing finance for 2 years, which is totally different than what I do. But actually, I learned a lot from that experience, but quickly realized that it wasn't my calling. I didn't feel that sense of reward that I had recalled feeling when I worked with kids, when I saw them thrive and change. And so I ended up pivoting at that point. I started to work on my master's degree in special education, while at the same time kind of leveraging the training and the work that I had done with kids. And I started tutoring kids myself who had all different types of learning challenges, dyslexia, ADHD, all kinds of learning challenges. And really just slowly, organically started to create what is now EBL Coaching, where we have an amazing team of specialists who each specialize in different skill areas, whether it's early childhood reading or executive functioning skills or high-level math. And I kind of evaluate each student and then hand match them with one of the tutors and then create this individualized lesson plan for each student using the right research-based multisensory techniques that are best for each student. And again, it's just amazing what a difference it can make when a child receives the right support with the right methods that are tailored to their needs. It can just be life-changing for them.
I want to hone in on something that you mentioned there, and it's something that's on your website, something you've spoken about before. Multisensory techniques. What are those? What does that mean in a nutshell? And why is that so important for students and families that are coming in with these challenges?
So there's really been a lot of research as to the most effective approach for helping students who have learning disabilities and really learning challenges. And that specifically is a multisensory approach. And really what that means is that rather than, say, just working out of a workbook or listening to a teacher, we engage the visual, the auditory, and the tactile kinesthetic modalities simultaneously when teaching. So to give you an example, one method that we happen to specialize in is called the Orton-Gillingham method, which is a specific research-based multisensory method that was really originally designed for students who have dyslexia, but really I found helps any child who has a reading challenge. And so what we do as part of the multisensory approach is we integrate tools like colored sand, magnetic tiles, mini whiteboards, audio-visual flashcards as part of this structured, systematic approach to teaching reading, which, by the way, not only is so effective, but the kids tend to really enjoy it because it's so engaging and they really like manipulating those different tools.
I love that. And what age groups are you finding are ideal for the kind of tools that you are introducing now? Because I'm sure someone is listening and thinking, oh, but that wouldn't necessarily work for this age group. But I think sometimes, what we think as parents and what we see clinically actually like, no, this works for even up to these ages can be really illuminating to find out interesting ways to take someone from being a reluctant reader to being excited and just building that confidence in their capabilities.
Yes, so we do work with kids as young as the preschool level, and we go all the way up through the adult level. So we see it all. And everything is about individualizing the instruction based on what's right for that student. So for example, if an older child is struggling with basic reading, we wouldn't necessarily use tools like colored sand that they might find to be babyish, so to speak. We might do table writing or sky writing, or kind of modify the multisensory approaches to their sort of age level, still using the same philosophy and the same approach, but making sure it's appropriate for their age level. So this method, this approach really applies to all levels. We just sort of tweak the implementation of it a little bit based on their age level.
I love that. And thinking back to what you were mentioning earlier about all the different diagnoses and challenges that you're seeing. So, speaking about the different challenges that students may face on their learning journey, their individual experience, how can we teach them tools? And I think it's so important to not only teach students tools, but teach the people who are in their environment how to create more supportive environments for them.
Yeah. So, well, I think that it's really important that we give students the tools and the strategies as early as possible. So obviously the earlier we can identify any challenges, the earlier we can start targeting them, the better it'll be for the student as they move through school. So I always say if a parent is noticing that something isn't right at home, the child's really struggling to learn how to read, they're struggling to get through their homework, whatever it is, they should start by having a conversation with their teacher. See if the teacher's noticing these kinds of challenges also. And if so, it might make sense to have an evaluation done. It can be done free at school, or families can do it privately outside of school, just to dig a little bit deeper and see if, in fact, maybe there is dyslexia or ADHD or a learning disability or whatever it may be. And if so, there's so many services and resources that are available now to help students and to help them build these skills that are so critical for success in school and really success in life.
Yeah. And I think that there is a really tangible gap between what we experience at home often as parents, what we're noticing what is happening at school and the communication piece. Maybe we are nervous to talk to teachers. Maybe we're concerned about their time too, because teachers are so busy, and their resources. We may make assumptions that if my child was having a problem at school, they would let me know. So we may not mention the problems we're seeing at home. There are all these conversations we have, especially as moms, about how our kids behave with us. And we may say, okay, this meltdown about homework at home, it's just because they're with mom, right? Like, I know with mom, I'm safe, so I can do this. And so, we may not have conversations because we have all these assumptions, or we may have shame about asking for help. What is a way that we can try to push back past that and communicate our concerns? And what are some reasonable expectations in your experience for what will be communicated from schools? And the goal here is to try to help people understand, maybe give them that push to reach out for help. Because even if someone's not saying something to you, it doesn't mean that you can't reach out to the school, ask for questions, ask for testing. So, how do parents go about that if they have a concern at home?
Sure. So I always say it's always better to be proactive than reactive. And unfortunately, I hear so many stories of parents hearing at the end of the school year that their child was struggling all year long and that they may not be promoted to the next year. Or maybe it's the second parent teacher conference that they find out about all of these struggles that have been happening the whole time. So, again, if a parent is noticing something isn't right, it is important to reach out to their teacher. And I think it's also the manner in which they reach out to the teacher. I think if it comes from a place of real concern for their child, nothing against the teacher, against what they're doing or how they're doing it, but I'm so worried about my child. This is what I'm seeing at home. Can we set up a call? Can we set up a meeting to discuss this so I can tell if you're seeing this at school or what you're noticing, or if you think maybe an evaluation might make sense. I think if it comes from the right place, from a place of real concern for your own child and not in any kind of imposing or threatening way, I think teachers are more than happy and open and willing to have that conversation.
Yeah, get curious, not furious. It works with us with our kids, and it works with us with other adults too, and professionals. So, that evaluation piece for someone who may not be aware, again, at home, maybe has these inklings, these feelings, and they're thinking, well, again, like an evaluation would have been triggered if there was this consistent problem at school. What in reality is what's typically happening on the school level if there is a learning challenge or behavioral challenge? It's starting to impact class or school, but that communication piece isn't happening between the caregivers and the teachers. What is going to be the thing that triggers the evaluation for your average student?
I think it really varies a lot from school to school, from district to district, from state to state. There are some states and districts that really try to do everything that they can internally before they have a child evaluated. They try to give them some evidence-based instruction, or they try to pull them out or give them some accommodations before going through the evaluation. And others don't do that. Some, unfortunately, really don't do anything. Others are more proactive, where they will officially recommend an evaluation based on what they're seeing in school. So it's really not consistent, unfortunately, would be the real answer. It varies so much. And that's why, again, a parent is always going to be their child's best advocate, and they should not make any assumptions that a teacher or a school will do what's right for their child in those kinds of circumstances. Kind of just the reality.
Exactly. Well, I think, that's what we want. We want the reality. We want that guidance, because I think so many of us are operating under this belief that we're going to be told if there's a problem. So I think it's really valuable information to say, no, you are the expert in your child, and you are teaching your child to be an expert in themselves. And so being willing to bring up these conversations and have these curious and, like you said, not furious conversations with professionals to try to get answers and try to get support is the first step. So not being afraid to break the ice and to have those conversations. What do you want to know about any other roles that caregivers may have in accessing services, because there is the piece of their education at school, but then there's also beyond school. There's what a school system can provide, and then there's understanding, like you said, the uniqueness of your school, of the services that they provide, and when you need to talk to your pediatrician, get outside third party help and support. So what are some tips you have to help empower families to really step into their role to access services?
Sure. Well, I think, of course, again, step one is having the evaluation done and knowing really what's going on. So, if your child, for instance, has dyslexia and you know that they need Orton Gillingham instruction, find out if your child's school offers that. Some schools have teachers or pull out professionals that are trained in Orton Gillingham and can give that instruction at school. Many schools don't have that. If your child needs speech therapy 4 times a week, is there a provider that can give them that in school without completely interrupting their curriculum? So I think step one is getting the diagnosis. Step two is finding out what your child needs and whether their school can provide that. And if they can't, seeking outside support. And that's where other resources like pediatricians and tutors and other therapists would come in outside of school, because sometimes it's just not enough what the school's able to provide. They might have an Orton Gillingham provider who can do 30 minutes once a week, and that just might not be enough. So really having an understanding of who your child is, what their needs are, and then what the school can provide is so important, and then going from there.
Those are great tips. So for going back to school, we're at this time, and in part, I was so excited to have this conversation because we are very much in this back to school mode right now. But when this is airing, most of us have had a month to a month and a half for the dust to settle on the new school year. And I think, it can be a little too overwhelming to do too many tips and tricks when kids are just figuring out the mechanics of how, social things work in their classroom, new teachers, how hungry they get because, well, we're not allowed to have snack at the time that I expected, mom or dad. That's different this
Yeah.
year, right? Once
Yeah.
that has settled out for the school year, do you have any tips for families with neurodivergent children for going back to school and getting into routine that you think sets them up for success, so they're already kind of in a good frame of mind to then use those tools they're learning?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it can be a very challenging transition every year from summer to fall for everyone, really, especially students who are neurodiverse, but really for all children. And so I do think setting up systems, structure, and routines is really helpful. For example, I tell parents to create a study space for their child, whether it's a desk in their room or if it's a communal space in the kitchen, whatever it is, have a consistent space where they always do their homework and make sure they always have all of the supplies that they need: pens, pencils, tape, highlighters, whatever it is. And if the supplies run low, restock it right away so that your child doesn't stop in the middle of their homework session and start wandering around looking for supplies. If they work in a communal table, make them a little homework bucket that has all of their supplies that they take from their room to the spot and back. Also try to set up a consistent time for doing homework. You know your child. Do they work better right after school when they're still in school mode? Do they like to have a snack break or an athletic break and work an hour later? Whatever it is, but have that be a consistent time where they're going to start their homework this time, they're going to turn it in, have them use a planner or an assignment book and write everything down, cross everything out once it's done, and then make sure it's either turned in electronically or put in their backpack in the right place to be turned in. Using checklists are also great. So the more systems and strategies that parents can put in place, the easier that transition is, and the more successful the child will likely be in school.
To really hone in on a detail that you mentioned, because I think it's really interesting. When we went through school, we're about the same age, I think. So when we went through school, we had the paper planners. Now there's this transition to electronic, which is good in a sense because it's teaching kids real life skills that they will have to implement. They will have to use electronic planners. That being said, there is something to writing something down when we're learning how to organize our thoughts and our schedules, our activities, and going through those checklists, like you said. It's a different experience online, and deleting a reminder you put and having that list in front of you that you're minding. So as an educator and as a specialist in your field, could you speak to the value of the different ways of journaling or scheduling with kids so that maybe we can give parents an idea of the benefits of different approaches, so that, again, just another tool for them with their kids if they're having issues with organizing their schedule? What could be something that could really give them a boost and put them on the right trajectory?
Sure. And of course, we are in this transition of pivoting away from physical pen and paper and writing and more digital. But there is research that tells us that the kinesthetic act of writing, physically writing, helps information stick in our long term memory. So it is more likely if they actually write down their assignments, they're going to remember them. With that said, I still think for younger students, fifth grade and younger, there's a lot of value in using an actual planner and writing their assignments down and looking at their assignment book, crossing things off. I think there's more pushback for kids who are a little bit older, middle school, high school, and that's okay. I think that electronic planners work just as well. They're just as fine. But I think what's happening is a lot of kids are relying on these online portals that schools use and that teachers use to post their assignments. And so they don't use any kind of planner, and they just say, oh, don't worry, my teacher's going to post it on this portal. But different teachers post at different times, and it's a little bit erratic in terms of when are they posting, did they post it, did I check to see if they posted. So if they're using a planner, whether it's electronic or whether it's physical, they're still having to go in, find out what the assignments are, put them in their planner, then they see a map of everything that they have to get done so that they can then create a schedule of when am I going to do this, how am I going to do this, how long is each assignment going to take. And it's a little bit more systematic than relying on this online portal with random postings.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more that just even having that extra step of maybe if you find that organization to not work for you, that online portal, putting it in your planner, getting that system down, just that next step might be the thing that makes it more concrete in your mind. Because as a parent, I find myself the way that my brain works, the way that I work with schedules, I'm quite visual. I take a written information and I make it very visual in my mind with my schedule, almost like a planner. Maybe it's because I did all those planners growing up. And I have a much more challenging time with the way the parent portal is keeping everything together and finding, okay, three different teachers sent out the same link. One of them works, the other two don't. And that's me as an adult who knows how to balance a lot in my daily life. And I'm thinking of, our children that are in sixth, seventh grade, those of us who have kids at that age. And you're thinking, what are they going to do if they face that frustration? Are they just going to give up because they don't know how to push through? So going with them and having systems in place to help them work through that frustration, work through, okay, when this doesn't work, I'm going to write it down. When this doesn't work, I'm going to ask a teacher. Have those things in place so that they don't get stuck in the failure, but they learn how to work through and master the schedule. Because I think a lot of us forget when we're trying to master a subject like arithmetic, like math or physics, that a lot of what we're teaching our students, no matter what the subject is to actually learn how to critically think and work the system. We get so lost in wanting that A or that A minus so that our GPA is good. And we forget that actually we're teaching our kids how to think and how to solve problems.
Yep. And I think with this evolving world of AI and technology, learning how to think and critically think and solve problems is more important than ever now. So I completely agree.
Absolutely. And it's interesting too, because, as a physician, it's fascinating because so many people, you'll ask them a question or your kids will ask a question. You'll say, okay, I want to teach my child how to solve this problem, how to look this up. And before, when they would look up information on the internet, they would get different resources. We'd click on three links, we'd go through them and we'd say, oh, isn't this interesting? This is different than this. And what kind of site is this versus this site, right? We would be able to like you do with your work, have an evidence-based look and make sure our sources are quality sources, et cetera, when we're gathering this information. Well, now what's happening at the top when you Google something, you're getting AI's point of view. And if you actually were to parse that out and look up that information, very often it is not correct, or it's very off topic because AI has misunderstood what you typed in. But you understand that as adult. Your kids don't necessarily understand that. So the critical thinking piece is huge. And then add on a layer, getting to the work that you do and the people that you serve and help learn new skills. How do you feel about this when you know your patients are coming in with these learning challenges, and now when they Google something, when they're learning something, they're doing a project for school, they're hitting into this new challenge of, it's almost like a person is answering their question, but the person is not a reliable observer, even though it's Google. It's a resource that they've grown up to think is a reliable resource. So how do you, as an educator, help kids to, with the work you do, not only master reading, writing, but the critical thinking piece that's so important for kids as they're learning how to navigate the world?
I think it's very tricky and complicated, and it continues to evolve as AI gets better and better. But I think that it's still so important that kids learn how to effectively read, write, and do arithmetic on their own without the use of AI. So I think especially young children, elementary, middle school, they really should not be using AI for any aspect of learning, in my opinion. I think when they get into high school, I think it's important for them to start to learn how to use AI as a tool, because I do think when it comes to future jobs and careers, they will look for individuals, this is my opinion, they will look for individuals who know how to use AI as a tool. So how do we know what's cheating and what's not cheating? How can we utilize this powerful tool to help us rather than to use it as cheating? And I believe that schools should start to integrate that into teaching, how to use AI as a tool into the classrooms. Because I think that kids don't really know, they're not trying to cheat, but that's like they're used to going on Google and they don't realize that that's cheating when they're copying using ChatGPT. So I think that should be built into education, is how do we use AI as a tool to help us in our learning when they're older.
Yeah, it's so, and to understand that in a way, it's kind of like cheating in the classroom in a sense, because the person who you're looking at their paper, you don't know if they've got it right or not. And AI right now, at least, is kind of that way. You honestly, it's written there in black and white. It looks very um, self-assured. That being said, again, if you parse out all the data, it may not be correct. So teaching kids that critical thinking piece is so important. And what you work with kids is also, those are the building blocks of learning, of working through challenges and problems, having that self-assuredness, feeling empowered that you can learn new things and that you have to trust yourself. So I think that's great. Those are great tools that are all moving you in that same direction. I've heard you speak about something that is a real pain point for many families. And it reminds me, thinking back to our journaling discussion and our planner discussion, helping kids learn or improve their organizational system is so important. We think about our desk table at home, if we had one growing up, and how our parents often were telling us is too messy, or maybe we're getting in trouble at school for a messy locker or a messy car when we got older. What advice do you have to get families and kids started on getting more organized and systematic so that they can build on these tools?
I think a lot of it is creating systems and tools at a young age. So even when young children, first, second grade, let's take a look at your desk and maybe let's buy some organizers for your pens, for your pencils. Let's organize your drawers. But instead of saying go organize your desk, let's help purchase those tools so we can together come up with a plan for how we're going to keep that organized. Let's look at your closet. Okay, this side will be shirts, but let's together come up with a system, again, rather than saying go clean up your room or go organize your closet, help them come up with systems. Then there's also electronic systems when they're a little bit older and they have a laptop and they have a million files. Well, how do we organize those files into groups, into subgroups? So working on digital organization is starting to become more important as well. So I think the more systems and tools we can implement, the better.
Absolutely. I love this advice. I think it's a real pain point, as I said earlier, for many families. And I think, like many things when it comes to our kids facing challenges and learning, getting involved as a caregiver is one of the first steps, kind of stepping out of the correction, the saying, you need to clean this or you need to learn this, you need to read, you've got your 20 minutes tonight, leaning into the connection piece, leaning into the how can we get the ball rolling on this together and make it something that you're empowered and excited to do, right? Getting into the motivation piece, thinking about motivation, and something I know you speak a lot about with reading. What are some ways, starting at a young age, that we can take some of our more reluctant readers? Because there are children, my oldest child, we would read to her since she was a tiny baby, but when she was doing some trainings, 6 months old, when they start doing the potty training and all that, we would just sit and read books, right? And that was a big part of that training, was being able to read books was a way to spend that time and then learn, oh, this is where this happens. And so reading was always just a big way for us to fill time and to connect, whether it was when we were at home, just trying to, again, pass that time, whether we were traveling, telling stories at night. We just read all the time with that child. It was such a part of our lives. And that child now is actually an author of her own right. She's written 3 books. She's got 2 more coming out next year. So a very literature loving human being. Our youngest would get quite emotional as a young child when you would try to read to him. He really did not like being read to. He didn't want to stop. It just wasn't something that worked for him. And when I think about your multisensory programming that you talked about, right? Reading doesn't have to be we sit down with a book in our hands. So what are some ways, you talked about ways that you work in a more clinical setting, but what are some little tips and tricks that families who have young, reluctant readers can try to get their kids more excited about books and storytelling and less reluctant?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is sort of finding a hook that will sort of allure them in. And sometimes just finding a topic that they're interested in, whatever it is, volcanoes or rainbows or unicorns, and then getting books, not just books, but comic books, newspapers, magazines, anything that's related to reading that's about that topic, just to kind of lure them in and keep it short. Maybe start with just 5 minutes of, look at this really cool book on unicorns that I just got. Let's read it together and just slowly build it in. I think also creating rituals is really a good one. Like, for example, that ritual of 15 minutes, maybe there's a little reading nook in your child's room that you create that has a cushy pillow and a lamp and a really inviting space. And you sit with them and you start by reading to them. And then eventually when they're a little older, maybe they read a page, you read a page until they're ready to start reading. And they have that special nook in that corner. Some families will also do something like a family reading hour, where it might be right after dinner or before dinner, where everybody sits together on a couch or wherever around a table, and each person reads their own book of their own choosing, unrelated to one another, but everyone's kind of together in this room reading, and maybe you talk about it, maybe you don't, but you kind of have this tradition of being together. So I think these kinds of things can help bring joy into reading, so that there isn't a negative connotation like, oh, I have to read for 20 minutes, but there's actually a lot of joy that I get from the experience of reading.
I love how you brought up the special interest, because I think that's really important, and especially important with many, not just young children, but children who are neurodivergent, because special interest can be such a great way to connect with them. And I feel like you always know how old someone's child is based on how many dinosaur names they remember. I was at the dentist's office yesterday, and a child, a very young boy, brought out a dinosaur, and I misnamed it. He asked me, a stranger, what the name was. I misnamed it, and she corrected me because she's more in that season of life. And it made me laugh. And I thought, oh, I remember those days when I remembered and I knew every dinosaur's name and we had all the characters and such a fun time. So again, kind of diving into those moments and just really living them with your kid is a great way to connect and get them excited. Something that we do as a family, be curious on if this is something that you do ever and you're with kids that maybe are really reluctant to read. Something we did that helped our child get more excited about sitting in stories and not just because he's way more Lego and building focused. He's my little future engineer, I think. And he was more interested in that. And one way we were able to crack into storytelling was getting really engaging and in a way tactile about it. So what we did is we have this little lamp with a flameless candle inside that we would put in this little lamp that was very fun. You held it from a handle, and each child gets to hold the lamp. We dim the lights, and then they get to tell their story. Or if there's a time where we don't have that, we just have a flameless candle, they get to pass the candle. And it's a way almost to pass the baton. So kids are really excited when they get their opportunity to tell their story. But then it also helps direct the attention for the young ones, especially to the child who's telling the story. And it helps with if you do have some children that maybe have a harder time with attention and also impulsivity where they kind of want to take back the floor. It's a nice visual cue that no, the storyteller has the floor, they have the flame right now. And so they're telling the story. Thinking of that, are there any other kind of unique tips for families to try? That really worked for us, but any cool things that you've seen patients or families do that you thought, oh, that's really unique and that really seems to be working?
Yeah, I think any of those sorts of rituals where we're taking reading away from the task of reading and building in this family moment is really so key, because I think there's so much negativity, negative associations with reading, but creating reading nooks and this special moment that mom and child are going to have together, dad and child, every night or Sunday night or whatever it is, or the tradition of family reading together, any kind of way we can make it more of a ritual and something that kids look forward to, it will take away from the negative association with reading and make it a more positive experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, thinking back to your experience as an individual and a professional growing into the role that you have now in your successful business, looking back at how you learned from your experiences and grew your business and grew the practice of how you want to help families and students, what are some skills that you think have helped you succeed on that path? And how do you think that could translate to tools that you actually use in your practice that you think, man, I learned this on my path. And I think this was just a gold nugget that I want to share.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've learned so much and my life has pivoted in a lot of directions. And I think that for me, it's number one, being open minded to those pivots. I mean, I thought I was going to do finance and I thought that was my path, and it just intuitively didn't feel right. And so I pivoted. And not only did I pivot, but I knew if I was going to delve into education and make something of it, I was going to get higher degrees. I was going to really specialize in it and learn everything about it. So once I kind of figured out what my path was, that was really important to me, was to really study it and learn about it and get those higher degrees. And I think really it's cliche, but being resilient, it's no matter what you do, whether it's running a practice, growing a business, being a therapist, you're always going to run into challenges and things will bring you down, and you're going to say, I wish I didn't do that. I wish I didn't do it that way. And my attitude is, if I make a mistake, and we all do, I try to just reflect on it and say, okay, what could I have done differently? And if this happens again in the future, how will I deal with this situation in a better way? And just really just learning from those moments. I try to teach my own kids that, and I actually try to show them and tell them about those moments of challenge that I face and how I overcome them and move past them, so that they too eventually can learn to do that. But I think just learning from those moments and moving past them and not dwelling on them is something that has really helped me.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think It's so inspiring because often when you see someone like yourself who's so successful and well-spoken and had your educational background, it's easy to think you've had it all figured out from the beginning and that you didn't make any mistakes, right? Because we don't broadcast the mistakes, but we know how many mistakes were made along the way, and that without those mistakes, we wouldn't be who we are today. And it's interesting because I think as an educational system, we are very focused on kind of a gold star mentality and an achievement mentality of the achievement being getting a certain grade, having a passing grade, or having an A or a B, whatever it is, the goal for your individual child or yourself. And we forget that it's more about the process, and that every time we fail a test and then we do better on the next test, that's a bigger victory in a lot of ways, because it means that we face that and we learn from it than just getting A's every single time, right? And so teaching our kids to embrace mistakes is so key. One thing that we do as a family is we try to head on at least once a week around the table, talk about the things that went well, as well as the things that did not go well, the mistakes we made. Because when we air them out, when we give them light, shame, right? Shame can't live. It can only live in the darkness. So if we're not sharing the mistakes we made, we're letting them kind of cook in shame and get bigger and bigger and bigger and take on a life of their own. Whereas if we just talk about it, we say, this was a mistake. And then we as caregivers say, oh, that's really interesting. Or, oh man, how'd that feel? They tell you, oh, what do you think you learned from that? Helps them move through it and past it rather than getting stuck in it, which as a child is so easy to do.
Absolutely. Completely agree.
It makes me think of something that I wanted to ask you, because I think, so many families around the world and around the country here in the States where we're located, they have some really unique family challenges that they're facing as well. They may have neurodivergence that's running through generations. And so they have seen some of these tendencies or challenges in many members of their family. And they have to process that they're being faced now with, this is a challenge, right? This isn't just the way things are done. This isn't just the way we are. This is something that has a name, right? Which can feel that we can have feelings about that, I guess. I don't want to even label the feelings. We can just simply have a myriad of feelings when a family has for generations been experiencing certain challenges or traits. And then all of a sudden, now, because of where we are in our land of research and science and understanding of all the different neurodivergent conditions that are out there, now there's a name, and we can get stuck in feelings of shame and not wanting to name something. But we also can really benefit if we move through that feeling to understand that there can be some really wonderful resources and also community and connection once we understand this part of who we are or who our child is as an individual, and understand how we can best support them at school or at home so that they can be as successful as they can be as an individual. What advice would you have to families that are going through that experience of recognizing in themselves? Because we all know when people go to that diagnosis, that clinical visit, and someone is diagnosed maybe with autism or ADHD, it's so common for there to be a light bulb moment in the room that's either happening behind the scenes in the mind of the parent, or even the clinician is saying, well, we see this run in families. And then there's a discussion about that. What advice would you have for families who are coming into this moment to assure them and empower them to see it as something that could actually benefit and support them and their child, rather than something necessarily that's a negative?
Yeah. I think there are certainly some families that worry about a label, they worry about a stigma, about having this diagnosis. But we now live in a day and age where there are so many resources, so much support, so many support groups that are out there that are really only available once we have that diagnosis. So I look at it as a gift. If you find out your child has ADHD or autism or dyslexia, whatever it is, you now open up this huge door of services and support that will help them thrive in school, out of school. You as a parent can find support groups to learn how to parent a child who has those kinds of challenges. So there's so much out there that really is only available once you have that diagnosis. So I think it's so important. We're fortunate that there's so many opportunities to get your child evaluated. There's so many resources. There's so much support. And I think it would be doing your child a disservice to not delve into those opportunities.
Mm. Thank you for saying that. I think that's really the perspective that is most beneficial for us to understand. We're so many of us are so afraid of stepping into the light and being seen for who we are or for who our child is because of these old beliefs and shame. At the end of the day, we're doing ourselves a disservice. If your child would benefit from a service that's there, get them the service that's there if you can. And to lean back into something we were discussing earlier, if you sense that your child needs an evaluation, needs services, and they're not available in your school, it's okay to be the squeaky wheel. It's okay to be the trailblazer and say, I know we haven't done it like this before. I know we haven't had this service provided at this school before. What do you think we could do to get it provided, right? Or, okay, we can't have it during the school day. What are resources in the community, right? Ask for what you and or your child need. Is there a support group in your area? No. Is there one online, or should you start a support group, right? There's so many opportunities to, if you aren't living in a place where there is a culture of inclusivity and a culture of feeling that this is very outwardly supported, you can be a part of the change to make it so and make it better for kids in your community and families too. So I'm just so inspired to have this conversation with you, have a really frank, positive conversation about how we can support our kids, because it is so important. And if we do this as early as we can, that doesn't mean we should shame ourselves if we didn't start when our child was in preschool, right? If they're in middle school now or high school now, and we're saying, no, we do need to address this. There's no day like today. Ask for support, get the evaluation, talk to your pediatrician, whatever it is that you need to do to get support. And I'm just so grateful, Dr. Levy, that you are out there advocating for getting kids what they need, and really in an evidence-based way and a one-on-one way for them and their families, because that is so critical. I want to go back to actually the name of your business, because we were talking off air about what it triggers in me as someone who works in medicine. It's obvious it's EBL, evidence-based learning, but it's more than that. Tell us about how you named your business.
It's actually funny that it's obvious to you because it's not obvious to most people. And I think because maybe you have the physician background, but so it's a combination. It's both evidence-based learning, since we specialize in evidence-based techniques. And it's also my initials, Emily Beth Levy. So kind of worked on both ends, but a lot of it just embraces that, the work that we do, which is evidence-based, really designed to use the best practices that we possibly can when we work with students.
That's wonderful. And to have it be your initials, be who you are, and this is your mission, and you stay true to it. And you are out there for storytellers as you listen to this. If you want to learn more from Dr. Levy, she has so many incredible resources out there online that you can listen to, other podcast episodes, other episodes where she's talking to professionals and giving really excellent tools and advice. So please look those up. There's so many great resources. Dr. Levy, how would you like people to best connect with you if they want to learn more about the work you're doing or potentially work with you?
The best place really is our website, which is eblcoaching.com. That's where parents will find other podcasts that I've done, lots of articles I've written about how to parent children who have neurodiverse needs, also about the tutoring services that we provide. And they can reach out to me directly through our website as well. And also social media. I do a lot of Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, X. We're on all the platforms.
Absolutely, everyone. If you are feeling a need and you think that you would benefit, please reach out to Dr. Levy on her platform. She's fantastic. And I'm just so grateful we were able to have her share these tips for you and your families here on the show. Thank you so much, Dr. Levy. Anything else that we missed that you want to share with our audience that's coming up in the future that we should know about?
This has been a great in-depth conversation. I think we covered a lot of material, and I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Levy. Us too. And storytellers, thank you so much for being here. We so appreciate your time. And I hope you learned something today. I know I did, and I'm excited to apply it into my life with my kiddos too. Until next time, stay safe and take care. I'll talk to you soon.
Everybody's lonely, but you can hold on to me.